Bon bini de Curacao. Welcome from Curacao today. Today we will talk about slavery, namely mental slavery, and what you can do in order not to be a mental slave. Stay with me till the end of this video. We will have a contest and something to win. Let's start with a little bit of history. In ancient times, large parts of population in every country were enslaved. They were slaves. In ancient Greece, depending on the city, between 40 and 80% of the population were slaves. In ancient Rome, above 1/4 of the population were enslaved. In Byzantium, around 20% of people were slaves. And slavery was an everyday phenomenon also during the Middle Ages. And in Middle Ages, Arab countries were very active in holding and trading slaves. And what most people don't realize is that until the 16th and 17th century, slaves and slave trade wasn't a racistic issue at all. Most people traded as slaves during that time by Europeans were actually Europeans. And slavery was actually legalized by a verdict of the Pope, who decided that if one country wins a war against the other country, that country has the right to take the people of the other country and enslave them and sell them as slaves. The prisoners of war were considered slaves, or they could be either killed or enslaved. So millions of people from Europe were sold as slaves, for example, to Ottoman Empire, still in 18th century. And beginning in 17th century, there was another Pope verdict that gave certain companies, like for example the West India Company, the exclusive right to trade slaves between Africa and the colonies, the American colonies and the Caribbean colonies. And this West Indian Company was very effective in trading slaves. And they have exported several millions of slaves only in 20 years of the activity. And around 1850, most of the countries in America started to abolish slavery. In some countries it was earlier, in some other countries it was later. So slavery is illegal for around 150 years. And in most European countries it was illegal since 14th, 15th century. But after that, there was another form of slavery, softer form of slavery called serfdom, that was very popular in Europe and also in other countries. It meant that the peasant was a private property of the lord who owned the land, and the peasant wasn't able to move to other lands, and the lord was responsible for all the justice between peasants, and he was generally responsible for life and death of his peasants. So peasants were economically dependent on the lord, and they didn't have any rights other than given by the lord to them. But let's jump to 1850. So legally the slavery was abolished. But 13 years ago, when I was visiting Martinique, also in the Caribbean islands, I noticed certain phenomenon. In Martinique, 98% of the population is black. They are the descendants of the slaves imported to Martinique from Africa. And in the luxury hotel I was staying, all the service people were black, with the exception of two people, the hotel owner and the hotel director. So they are theoretically free people, but in reality they still work for the old slave owners. And I don't want to be accused here to be racistic or anything. It's not a question of race. The same phenomenon happens between white people in Europe, in the States, in every country in the world. It is a mental attitude. I call it mental slavery. It is a mental construction that makes it impossible for most of the people. I would say over 90% of population, maybe 99% of population, to be free person. They are just set up to be dependent on other people. They need somebody above them to decide for them what to do, and they are economically dependent because of the mental structure. Now let's come to the self-assessment, and I am sorry for the strong words, but I don't want to lie to anybody. I don't want to sugarcoat anything and anybody. So let's call the things by their name. You are a slave if you work to pay off debt or you work to sustain your life. You are a slave if you live where you live, although you want to live somewhere else, but you think you can't change it. You are a slave if you don't do the things you would like to do because you think you can't afford it, or you spend your time doing things that you don't want to do. Generally, you are a slave if you don't decide about how you spend your time. You are a slave if your existence depends on somebody else, be it a partner, an employer, or maybe your country. You are a slave if you can't afford or you are afraid of saying what you think. You are a slave if you do certain things or you don't do certain things due to social norms that you don't identify yourself with. You are a slave of your emotions, of your fears, if you don't do certain things, don't take certain steps, and don't take certain decisions you want to take because of the fear of the consequences. You are a slave if you live in circumstances that make you unhappy, that make you suffer, but you can't change them or you can't afford to change them, or you are afraid to change them. I can't do this assessment for you. Only you can truthfully assess the situation and your status. And if you realize you want to change it, but you don't know how, I will be talking about that in the upcoming videos, about the reasons for the mental slavery and also about how to break free from the mental slavery. Why I'm telling you this from Curacao here? First of all, Curacao has a long history of slavery, and I was planning to do that video just from here. But then I had some doubts if it wasn't too drastical. Until I saw this gate, free from mental slavery. And it was a sign. And I realized I had to shock you in order to make you do the first step and break the chains of mental slavery and become really a free person. And in the next videos I will give you more methods how to become mentally free, how to become financially free, how to free yourself from the chains you put yourself into. So if you like this video, give me a thumb up, subscribe below and hit the bell button in order not to miss the future videos. I talk a lot about freedom, I talk a lot about doing big important things, about doing the impossible. I talk about how the best entrepreneurs in the world think and act, how the self-made billionaires in our world think and act, and I talk also about cryptocurrencies, about my investments, and I talk to the most important people in the cryptocurrency world. I invite you to comment this topic, tell me your experiences, tell me what you think about that, the stories you have heard, and your perspective on what we are talking here about. Share this video with your friends, with your loved ones. They will thank you for that. Among the best shares, among the best comments, I will give away one copy of the bestseller I have written with Brian Tracy. This special edition like that isn't available anywhere. You can get it only by winning it in this competition. So it's worth trying. If you like this video, you will certainly like my other videos. Here you will find some of my best videos. Thank you from the Caribbean. I wish you a fantastic day. Let's do something extraordinary today.